When police opened the closet in Bob Crane's Scottsdale apartment, the image of television's clever hero collapsed. The star of Hogan's Heroes had been found in June of 1978. His life suddenly cut short. Inside that closet they uncovered cameras, tripods, cables, and rows of videotapes, a private archive that exposed a side of Crane the public had never seen. It was not money, not scripts, not souvenirs from the set. It was evidence of an obsession that had already strained his marriage, shaken his career, and left his family stunned. To audiences, Bob Crane had been the fastest wit in the West, the smiling lead who made a risky sitcom work in the 1960s. But offstage, he was documenting his private life with almost scientific dedication, aided by a friend with access to the latest video technology. Just days before everything changed, Crane was talking about starting fresh, about pulling away from that world. The closet told a different story, and what it revealed left a legacy his family could never forget. In the early 1960s, Bob Crane was already a familiar voice in Los Angeles. Before television made him a household name, he had conquered radio. His morning program wasn't just background noise for commuters, it was a full-blown variety show. Listeners tuned in for quick impressions, bursts of drumming, and interviews that felt spontaneous rather than scripted. His timing was so sharp that celebrities preferred his studio to others. He could put them at ease, charm an audience, and still keep the program moving at breakneck speed. That blend of warmth and wit earned him the title, the Man of 1,000 Voices. And even Walt Disney praised him as the fastest wit in the West. For a man still climbing in his career, such recognition hinted at even bigger things to come. Crane wasn't satisfied with radio alone. His ambitions stretched beyond the studio booth. And by the mid-60s he began appearing in guest spots on television. It was clear he had something rare, a combination of confidence and approachability that translated seamlessly to the screen. That presence landed him the role that would define his career, Colonel Robert Hogan in Hogan's Heroes, which premiered in 1965. At first, the project seemed destined for trouble. A comedy set in a prisoner-of-war camp during World War II sounded like a gamble that could offend audiences rather than amuse them. But Crane's performance turned skeptics into believers. With his playful grin, improvisational skill, and easy rapport with the ensemble cast, he transformed the risky premise into a hit. Audiences adored him. For 6 seasons, Crane was at the center of a cultural phenomenon. His face appeared on billboards, fan magazines, and even children's lunchboxes. He was nominated for 2 Emmy Awards and became one of the most recognizable comedic leads on American television. At home, he seemed equally solid, a family man who worked tirelessly to provide, a professional at the top of his game, a performer admired by peers and beloved by fans. To most, Bob Crane looked like the embodiment of mid-century American success. Clean-cut, charming, and unstoppable. Yet as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows behind it. The man America thought they knew was carrying private habits that few suspected, and the truth of that hidden world, years later, would come spilling out of a closet no one expected to open. Bob Crane's curiosity about technology had always been part of his charm. In his radio years, he cluttered the studio with microphones, tape machines, and odd devices that fascinated him more than the playlists he spun. When he moved into television, that curiosity followed. But as the 60s wore on, his interest shifted from creative experiments to something more personal. Photography became his new passion. At first it looked like an innocent hobby. He snapped pictures of his children, his co-stars, even candid moments from the set of Hogan's Heroes. But gradually the subject matter changed. The camera was no longer just for family albums. It began documenting aspects of his private life that were far more intimate. This private shift took on a new dimension when he met John Henry Carpenter. Carpenter was a video technician with access to the latest equipment just beginning to filter into Hollywood. Portable video recorders, monitors, new gadgets that promised to revolutionize entertainment. To Crane, Carpenter was more than a supplier. He was a guide into a new world. Their friendship deepened quickly. Carpenter showed Crane how to wire hotel rooms for recording, how to angle cameras discreetly, how to push the technology beyond casual use. Soon they were inseparable, traveling together, staying in the same hotels, and indulging in habits that to outsiders looked like bachelor antics, but to those closer, raised eyebrows. By the mid-70s, this hidden routine had become an obsession. Crane carried equipment with him everywhere, guarding tapes and boxes with unusual care. To him they were souvenirs of excitement, a private escape from the pressures of fame. To those who would one day discover them, they would appear as evidence of something far more consuming. What Crane thought was a harmless indulgence was becoming a pattern he could no longer control, and the day would come when those carefully stored boxes would no longer stay hidden. By the mid-1970s, Bob Crane's perfect image was fraying. At home, his first marriage collapsed under the strain of constant absences, rumors, and the habits he refused to abandon. Friends described him as distracted, restless, and preoccupied. The man who once thrived on discipline now seemed consumed by something he couldn't set aside. Professionally, his path was no smoother. Hogan's Heroes ended in 1971, and without it, Crane struggled to find another defining role. Hollywood, once charmed by his quick wit, grew cautious. Casting directors hesitated. Whispers followed him, and instead of leading roles, he was offered guest spots and smaller parts. The spotlight that had once placed him on billboards now felt out of reach. To keep working, Crane turned to theater. Regional stage productions became his main stage, and though audiences still applauded his energy, the difference was clear. He was no longer the national star. He was touring towns, carrying equipment with him on the road, stacking new tapes beside the old. On stage he performed for laughter. Backstage he returned to his rituals. His second marriage offered a chance at stability, but the private world followed him. Friends later remembered him as a man split between two lives, the entertainer eager to please, and the private individual caught in a cycle of recording and storing. And yet, there were flickers of change. Crane began to speak about fresh starts. He hinted at cutting ties with Carpenter, distancing himself from the very friend who had enabled so much of his private world. He wanted to reset, to leave behind what had already cost him a marriage and much of his reputation. But wanting change and achieving it are never the same. By 1978, Crane was still torn. On stage he smiled, joked, and carried the crowd. Off stage the boxes remained, reminders of a past he wasn't ready to face, and a future that would soon be defined by them. He believed he still had time to turn things around, but in Scottsdale, the truth waiting in his closet would silence that hope forever. In June of 1978, Bob Crane traveled to Arizona for a new chapter. He was starring in a stage comedy called Beginner's Luck, and by all accounts he seemed energized by the chance. Performing in front of smaller crowds was far from national television, but it gave him purpose. Some colleagues thought this was the beginning of a reinvention. Privately, he was even talking about moving on from Carpenter and focusing on rebuilding his life. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. When Crane failed to show for rehearsal, a colleague went to his Winfield Place apartment. Inside, he was found unresponsive. The scene raised questions. There was no forced entry. Nothing was missing. His life had ended abruptly, with no clear explanation. As investigators searched for answers, they reached the closet. What they discovered inside reframed the entire story. Instead of costumes or personal belongings, they found rows of tapes, cameras, tripods, and wires. It was no longer rumor or speculation. It was tangible proof of the secret life Crane had guarded so carefully. For investigators, the discovery was a startling lead. For the media, it was an irresistible headline. And for Crane's family, it was crushing. They weren't only grieving, they were forced to watch the most private details of their father's life become public. What had once been whispers now became national news. The narrative shifted instantly. The Emmy nominations, the billboards, the laughter of Hogan's Heroes, all of it was overshadowed by what came out of that closet. In an instant, the charming Colonel America had adored was redefined. And as the case moved forward, the tapes would not only shape how the world remembered Bob Crane, they would also shape the trial that followed, and the questions that remain to this day. After the discovery in Scottsdale, suspicion quickly fell on one man, John Henry Carpenter. He had been Crane's constant companion for more than a decade, the one who introduced him to the latest video gadgets, the one who traveled with him from city to city. More importantly, he had been in Arizona at the same time as Crane, staying in a nearby motel while Crane performed on stage. The two had been seen having dinner together the night before, even reviewing some of their recordings afterward. To investigators, the timing was too close to ignore. Detectives examined Carpenter's rental car and found faint traces that raised questions. But in 1978, forensic science was far less advanced than it is today. There was no reliable way to connect those samples directly to Crane, no fingerprints tying Carpenter to the apartment, and no physical item that could serve as undeniable proof. Without a clear link, the investigation stalled. For years, the case remained in limbo, filed away among other unsolved Hollywood mysteries. But in the early 1990s, science caught up. With DNA testing becoming more sophisticated, Scottsdale police revisited the evidence. Experts re-examined the samples taken from Carpenter's car, and the results suggested a possible connection to Crane. It was not definitive, but it was enough to move the case forward. In 1994, nearly 2 decades after Crane's death, Carpenter was arrested and charged. For Crane's family, it was a moment of cautious hope. They had lived with unanswered questions for years, and at last, there seemed to be a path toward closure. But as the trial unfolded, optimism faded. The prosecution presented motive, a friendship unraveling, jealousy, rejection, and pointed to the biological evidence. The defense countered with challenges. The DNA was partial, the chain of custody weak, the samples too old to be considered conclusive. The courtroom turned into a spectacle. Testimony revealed the extent of Crane's hidden world, exposing private details that the family had never intended to see discussed publicly. Instead of focusing solely on Carpenter, much of the attention shifted back to Crane's personal life. In 1995, the jury delivered its verdict. Carpenter was acquitted. For the Crane family, the result was crushing. The tapes in the closet had already reshaped his legacy, and now the trial ensured that the full truth of his final days might never be known. The questions remained, but justice did not. Bob Crane's story is often reduced to scandal, but his legacy runs deeper. He was a gifted performer who made millions laugh, even as he struggled with private battles no one truly saw. What they found in his closet left his family shocked. Yet it did not erase the joy he once gave audiences or the determination of his children to reclaim his name. In the end, he was more than a headline. He was a man talented, flawed, and unforgettable. For more emotional stories, check out this video.